Can everyone take their seats, please?
I would take a little bit more.
Reverend Newbill, are you still with us?
Yes, sir. I sure am.
Thank you very much. We're getting ready to convene the board meeting.
No problem.
Okay, we'll call the June board meeting of the JEA to order. Ask everyone to stand for a moment of reflection, followed by the pledge of the flag. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. We've had an agenda published and distributed. It's before you now, board members. May I have a motion to adopt the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Cumber.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Green, for the second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Zahn, safety briefing.
Thank you, Chair. Safety is a core value of JEA. In the event of emergency, I believe Ted Hobson, raise your hand. Ted's not here today. Mike, you're going to call 911, CPR? You going to do that too? All right, great. Dual skill set there. Evacuation, please look to your right, identify that person as your neighbor. Use the stairs to the left of the elevator. Proceed in an orderly fashion. Please hold the handrail. Exit onto the plaza and proceed to the southeast corner of Main and Church. Please make sure to look both ways and when you cross the street. And also, as a reminder, please put your cell phones on silent during the meeting to be respectful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Zahn. Ms. Brooks, Sunshine Law Public Record Statement, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a publicly noticed meeting. Minutes will be taken. There's quorum present in the room, and we have Reverend Newbill on the phone, so we're in good order to proceed.
Thank you, Ms. Brooks. Comments from the public. I only have one card. Any others, Melissa? Our good friend Dave Bruderly, back from his journeys around the world. Mr. Bruderly, we've missed you. You've been gone for 4 months.
Yes, sir. Thank you. This is my second time around the world on a ship. First time was 50 years ago, and I decided this time I'd go with room service on the SS Viking Sun. I'm sorry, the motor vehicle vessel Viking Sun. We went to 65 ports in about 40 different countries, and I saw a tremendous amount of change that has occurred over my lifetime in the last 50 years in Southeast Asia and Asia, and a tremendous amount of non-change in India. So it's quite, and what's relevant to y'all is Shanghai gets a lot of bad press for pollution, and when I was first in China, it was all bicycles and rickshaws. Today it's all automobiles, but I also saw Teslas, BMW electrics, and every motor scooter in Shanghai is battery electric. They are not motor driven or internal combustion engine driven. And I wanted to come here today to kind of say that I strongly endorse the process you're going through in your selection and also your interim selection with Mr. Zahn. I first, and also then have an ask of you to empower him and staff to do some things to help the business and political leaders in this country understand why we need to start using carbon metrics as part of our decision process, in addition to just financial metrics. And my travels just reaffirm my commitment to this recommendation. And I believe that we have some case studies here that we could use very quickly to test and give you a legitimate reason for engaging in this exercise, because you're proposing to sell land, JEA land, to the district, for example, with the old Southside Station. And I just read in the Jacksonville Business Journal that some folks are talking about buying land from the north side to help in the expansion of Jacksport and perhaps other distribution facilities. And all of these decisions have major implications on the carbon footprint of this community, and we need to understand what those metrics are if we're going to have a free market in economic development. We have to have metrics so people understand what the numbers are and how those decisions impact the numbers. When I came back, the headline the next day was about flooding. And the Times-Union has done a very good job of communicating to the public some of the problems that we face with flooding in this community of low-lying lands along the river, which include a lot of JEA property, and that affects your water and wastewater systems as well as your electric operations. But it also affects our economic development decisions, and we have a lot of land that's being proposed along the riverfront to be upgraded with several $billion of investment. And frankly, I think that it would be appropriate to use carbon metrics on those high-density develops to help communicate to the public why downtown revitalization will have many, many benefits in addition to the economic benefits. And one of those benefits would be reducing the carbon loading, the carbon footprint of this community by going to higher density urban infill. I met Mr. Zahn after Mayor Curry was elected at the Economic Committee that was chaired by Mayor Delaney out at UNF, and I made my impassioned plea that we need to use carbon metrics to guide economic development. And then I was very surprised to find this young man at the table put forth a proposal that we use sustainability metrics to guide economic development under the new Curry administration. I don't know that that recommendation went very far, but he's sitting here today, and he is in a position to help you all empower your staff and to do some outreach and education with our business and political leaders in the community to help them understand why there is a relationship between greenhouse gas pollution and sea level rise and flooding, and that we need to be proactive on that if we want to be a 21st century or a city that's going to lead this nation into the 21st century and get all the benefits that go with that. We have to make decisions based on good numbers, good data, good analysis, and I think you're in a position to help this community learn how to do it. You can't do it by yourself, because this is a situation, as I saw in China, where everybody on the planet has to be on the same page. And right now, as you know, in Washington, we're kind of all over the place on some policies related to globalization and other challenges that we face that I think, frankly, we're very confused. So we need some leadership at the local level, think globally, act locally. And I have the utmost confidence in under leadership of Mr. Zahn in the next several months, we can start that process. Hope you can give him all the authority he needs to do that, and help your consultants who are doing the executive search put these issues of greenhouse gas loading and leadership on reducing pollution into the selection process, so you get somebody who really understands what's going on throughout the world in this industry. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate your words. Thanks for your insights and the benefits of your worldwide travels. Maybe one day we can do the same.
It was fun.
Sounds like it. We heard from Councilman Schellenberg earlier. Did you have additional comments, Councilman?
No, I don't. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. And I don't see Dr. Gaffney, but based on comments he's made to us previously, he sends his regards from the mayor. Kim Wheeler, Arbor Day.
Good afternoon. I'm Kim Wheeler, and I'm responsible primarily for transmission, structures, lines, thermography, and tree work. Historically, our customers are unaware or fascinated by the transmission and the thermography, not the tree work. So we had to change our customers' perspectives. We spent a lot of time and effort literally transforming our perspectives. One of the basic models we used was to begin our designated Tree Line USA utility program, which we have maintained since 2012. In the state of Florida, there are about 40 utilities. Only 4 have that designation maintained since 2012. I'm going to introduce you to Joe Anderson, a forester, and you will really enjoy listening to his story and tell you more about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wheeler. Mr. Anderson,
How you
welcome
doing?
back.
Well, thank you. Remember me from last year?
We do. It was entertaining.
Yeah, no harmonica this year. But I would like to start with some closing remarks of the workshop that just took place. If I could take those closing remarks of the workshop, I think it really speaks highly of why we do the Tree Line USA. And here's some of the things that I took from what was being said. Love of place. You mentioned that. Also, status quo is no longer an option. You notice there's only 4 utilities that have taken place of this. Status quo is not using the Tree Line USA necessarily. Community, love for us and trusting in us. Building blocks for the community. Leadership, challenge, partnerships, innovative ideas for the future. All of those comments from that workshop and the closing remarks is one of the reasons why we participate in the Tree Line USA. So we do have some pictures of some of the staff. I do like to recognize that our foresters and arborists are also here in the room. If you could just stand real quickly, just so they can see you. So we don't do this alone. To have a utility that actually employs foresters and certified arborists to supervise this work speaks highly of us and as far as our innovation and our leadership. Whoops, I'm gonna go back. So the Tree Line USA is a recognition that we get from the Arbor Day Foundation and the National Association for State Foresters. There are 5 things that we have to, or core standards we have to meet. One is quality tree care. We have to demonstrate that. We have to demonstrate that we train our workers in quality tree care. We have to be involved in tree planting and public education. We have to show that we have a tree-based energy conservation program or message. And we also take part in an Arbor Day celebration. Worker training. This is important, and this is where we develop an unbeatable team. But as arborists and utility foresters, there are some things that we have to know. Some things we have to understand. One is that the power of Jacksonville can be found in a canopy of trees. We also have to understand and know that the #1 cause for unplanned outages in any utility anywhere happens to be vegetation or trees. We also have to understand the laws of physics, that electricity will do what it's supposed to do always, always. We understand with the laws of physics that wood is not a good conductor of electricity, but the vascular system of a live tree is, or the carbon path of burnt wood is a conductor of electricity. We know that lightning strikes trees, and we can't forget that inside those wires is nothing more than controlled lightning. And in our work and the things that we do in clearance and trimming trees, we know that when you're dealing with the laws of physics and electricity and lightning, that distance is our friend. Some of the things we have to understand that the electrical distribution system of Jacksonville. We have to know its trunk lines, we have to know its laterals, its branches, its transformers, its switches, and we have to know how it's grounded. But as foresters and arborists, we also have to understand the chemical distribution system of a tree. We have to understand its trunk lines, its branches, its laterals, its transformers, its switches, and how it's grounded. And one thing I'm going to ask you to do before you leave here, anybody in the room, is just to look out over this window. And what you're going to see is one reason why we are a Tree Line USA, because you're not only going to see the gray infrastructure of bridges and roads and pipes and wires, but you're going to see a green infrastructure of an urban canopy. Green infrastructure, incidentally, is a term that was coined in Jacksonville in the early 1900s. I'm sorry, not the early 1900s, the early 1990s is when that term was coined. I'm showing my age a little bit. But when I go, one of the other standards, one that we enjoy the most, is the tree planting and public education. We plant over 600 trees per year. We don't do it alone. One of the things you mentioned in the closing remarks of the last workshop was the importance of partnerships. We actually partner, well, we'll go back to tree planting. Tree planting is a goal of ours, but it's not our mission. So we have formed a partnership with an organization that is their mission, which is Greenscape of Jacksonville. We formed a partnership known as Green Relief, RELEAF. And so we plant 600 trees per year. But through Greenscape of Jacksonville, we are able to partner with the City of Jacksonville, the Duval County Cooperative Extension, the Florida Urban Forestry Council, also the Florida Forest Service. These are all organizations that we can partner to get those trees in the ground. So not only are we doing pipes and wires, we're actually putting down roots. But this right here is where we can deliver business excellence. This is where we are face to face with our customers and where they get to see who we are, and we help build a little bit of integrity of who we are and what we do. We also take part in an Arbor Day celebration. This is our second year that Jacksonville has actually had a Arbor Day festival. This is where we bring our community together to be tree-minded, remind us of the importance of trees, and where we can unite, and at least in a festival. So look for those. If you hadn't participated in the Arbor Day Festival, this year it was April 1st, look for it around April. Treeline USA, probably the most important reason is why we do it. To me, it's part of our sales pitch. Our sales pitch is what we're asking our community to do is find value in us, find value in the product and the service that we provide. In order to have a sales pitch, there are 5 steps you have to have. You have to pique their interest first. We do that every month when they pay their bill. We pique their interest. You also have to build integrity. The next thing you have to do in a sales pitch is you have to understand their needs and their wants. The next step is to deliver a solution for their needs and their wants. And the last step to every sales pitch is you have to ask for the sale. This particular program right here allows us to build integrity, allows us to be in front of our community to actually ask for the sale to win their loyalty. And that is the importance of this particular program. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Appreciate that. You can do it, yeah. Go ahead, Mr. Zahn. You want to make a comment on the presentation?
Yeah, just want to, a little bit of a broken record in terms of the way we've structured the board agenda one more time. This is really important for the public, media, as well as our employees. I've worked with the board to create 3 distinct sections. This next section will be our operations section, where the board will be able to review information on upcoming actions as well as take action. The second section, which we'll move into, which is section number 4, is strategy discussion. It's intended for the board to just have open dialogue around strategic initiatives within the company. Intended to be whiteboarding, if you understand that concept. And then subject matter exploration is really intended to be an educational element where we're talking about major trends in the company. And just want to remind everyone of those 3 major sections in this agenda because it is a distinct change from the past.
Thank you, Mr. Zahn. Appreciate that. Next item on the agenda under operations section is the consent agenda. The materials have been presented and circulated to the board. To have a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Flanagan. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Cumber. All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you. Anyone opposed, nay? Passes unanimously. Ms. Dykes, monthly operational and financial review.
Yeah, also invite Mr. Wanamaker to join us.
Mr. Wanamaker?
Good afternoon. Hot mic. Good afternoon. We have expanded the monthly operational and financial review to provide some additional background information to board members, in particular to present information that previously had been contained in the consent agenda but has been moved up into this monthly operations report. Given the length of the agenda today, and given how much time the board's already been meeting in the workshop setting, I'd like to propose, with your permission, Mr. Chairman, that we offer a condensed review of this portion of the board agenda, but then allot time for questions if there's anything board members would like to dig in on in a little bit more detail.
Please.
Flipping to first to page 3, I'll start with safety. And one of the things you heard from Mr. Anderson that I think was an incredibly good lead into this discussion is just how dangerous the work that our employees do. That work is incredibly dangerous, and their ability to focus on their jobs every single day and to wear appropriate PPE and to be engaged in the moment and to operate safely makes the difference between life and death for many of our employees. That's a reason that safety is a core value at JEA and a reason that we track this metric closely and put it up front in our report out to the board each month. I am happy to report that our safety metric is tracking better than it has since 2008, which is very, very good safety performance for our employees. Our recordable incident rate is 1.38 as it stands for the current year to date, which is actually exceeding our goal for the year of 1.4. Flipping forward to page 5 is the monthly operations scorecard for the electric system. This is the stoplight format that we've presented to the board in previous months, and for purposes of these comments, I'll focus on the stoplights that are not green. The system is performing very well in the electric system and is green in terms of meeting our targeted metrics for the year with one exception. That exception is electric outage duration, which is running high this year due to storms, although we've launched a program that's aimed specifically at reducing outage duration, and we'll actually talk a little bit more about that program during the deep dive hurricane update presentation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ryan to talk about financial performance in the electric system this year.
Thank you, Melissa. On page 6, we've got an overview of our electric system financial performance this year. A couple of highlights on this page. FY18 forecast for revenue is slightly under budget at about $3 million under budget, just over $1.2 billion forecast for the year. Overall net revenues are about $38 million under budget, and this is primarily driven by an increase in non-fuel purchase power expense, which is the planned deposit to the non-fuel purchase power stabilization fund that we plan to make this year to fully fund our plant Vogtle obligations through the commercial operation date of November 2021 and 2022. And so that's reflected in current year financials. On the bottom of the page there, I'll draw your attention to our electric cost metrics for the year. Those are forecasted to come in. Right now, it's a little behind schedule, or behind target, about $1.29 a megawatt hour. We're working hard to try to get that in line by the end of the year. I think we have a pretty good chance of hitting it. We're working hard and focused on it. So with that, we'll go to the next page.
Okay. The balance of this section is backup information that feeds into the summary metrics page that was provided up front. So if there are no other questions on electric system operations, I'll fast forward to water and sewer system scorecard, which is page 12. Page 12 in the water and sewer system, similar to the electric system, we're having a very good year in water and wastewater operations. There's one, thank you. There's one stoplight on this chart that shows up as red, and that's nitrogen to the river. That's a stoplight that, frankly, we knew when we set the aggressive goal at the beginning of the year, we likely were not going to be able to make because of construction at Arlington East. We kept the goal where it was to set a stretch goal for ourselves, and then we're hit by a hurricane. So we had the double hit of not only the construction, but also additional construction at Buckman, which increased our nitrogen to the river. The good news is that although we're not going to meet the stretch target for the year, we are well under our permit limits when it comes to nitrogen. So we have no concerns from a permit perspective. Ryan?
So turning to page 13, water and sewer system financial performance. Similar story from a revenue perspective, about $2 million under budget. $496 million is the forecast currently. On the expense side of the ledger, happy to report that we're forecasting lower than budgeted expenses from an O&M perspective, and so this leads to a $6 million delta to the good on the forecast versus the budget for FY18. When we look at our cost metrics on cost per kgal for water and sewer, again, both of these are slightly behind target. Sewer, I'm very confident we can make. It's off by a penny per kgal, and I think we're going to be able to get that in line. On water, I think that's going to be, of the three cost metrics, I think water is going to be the one that's the most challenging, although, again, we're going to try to make sure we focus on it hard.
Thanks, Ryan. From here, we'll flip forward to page 20.
Ms. Dykes, may I ask Mr. Wanamaker, what's the reason for the underspend on CapEx for water and sewer?
So we have a number of projects in the pipeline. I don't know that there's any like single project that is behind schedule. It's really more of just the volume and getting. I think Brian could talk to it a little bit as well, but a lot of it is getting appropriate contractors and getting engineers.
Timing? Are we just going to slide forward?
Pace of project delivery is going to be a challenge, not just this year, but for the next 5 years in water and sewer. What we're running into from a project delivery perspective is the tightness of the labor market. In the water and wastewater system, our contractors are primarily local, and the labor market is so tight right now that there's just been slower than expected delivery of capital projects, and so those will just slide forward a little bit.
Thank you.
Yep.
Customer experience on page 20. This page is largely unchanged since the last time we talked about it with the board, but I will flag a preview for you that we are expecting our final wave of residential results in July. So by the time we get to our next board meeting, we will have the final results for residential customer satisfaction for the year. And with that, if there's no other questions on operations, I'll turn it over to Ryan to talk about financials.
Okay.
Let me just pause on that. Anyone have questions on operations? Reverend Newbill, any questions for Ms. Dykes?
No, sir, everything.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay. So on page 25, couple of highlights. Page 25 is the key rating agency metrics that we look at on an annual basis. And so we've got our targets and forecasts for FY18. As you can see, all of those metrics look very good and supportive of our current ratings. And the only one that is yellow is electric debt to asset ratio. We continue to be focused on debt pay down in the electric system. And so that's a key focus for us going forward. One thing I will point out is on the water and sewer system, we are, for the first time in a long time, below 50%, forecast to be below 50% on the debt to asset ratio at 49%. And that, I'm sure Joe will throw a big party on 10/1 when he makes that debt service payment. So, on page 26, we've talked about the yellow stoplights on this page. These are our internal kind of metrics that we use, and what we present to the rating agencies each year. And so the only yellow stoplights on these pages are the cost metrics, which you've already discussed previously. Everything else looks very good from an operational perspective and financial perspective. I'll skip 27 and 28. These pages really haven't changed in the last month in terms of our debt load and combined cost of debt. On 29, I will point out a couple of things on the variable rate side of our debt portfolio. On the charts on the left, you see that over the last few months, our variable rates on our both electric and water debt have been rising a little bit as the Federal Reserve has increased their federal funds overnight rate. I will point out that it's about 8% of our total debt portfolio on the electric side is unhedged variable, and 11% for the water and sewer side. So it's a very relatively small percentage of our overall debt, but it is going up a little bit. On the credit facilities, there's no change in the credit facilities and the providers. However, we did renew several of them, or in the process of renewing several of them this year. Just in the past month, we've renewed the Royal Bank of Canada facility, as well as U.S. Bank is actually expected to close next week, an extension on that one as well. And then we're in negotiations on the other two with Wells Fargo and Sumitomo. With those extensions, we won't have any other facilities up for renewal until 2020. So it'll give us some breathing room there. And on 30, the good side of raising interest rates from the Federal Reserve is our asset portfolio. In terms of the return on the investment yield for the portfolio, it's continued to go up over the last several years, and right now it's at a 1.6%. So, and that's all I have.
Any questions for Mr. Wanamaker? I know you met with the ratings agencies a couple of weeks ago. Any feedback from them on the financial metrics that you've just presented?
Generally, I will say that the meetings were very good. They were very complimentary of our performance over the last 6 months from a financial perspective. We walked them through some of the major milestones that we've achieved over the last 6 months, and it was a very, very good conversation with them.
Great. Any other questions before we move on to the budget? Okay, you're still on the clock, Mr. Wanamaker. Budget presentation. Thank you, Ms. Dykes.
So on the budget presentation, this is tab 3C. So this presentation today is about a 5-page presentation that represents about 5 months worth of hard work from a large number of people. We've we've spent a lot of time with the Finance and Audit Committee going through this budget in the March meeting and at the May meeting. And so this item today is an action item to bring to the full board for approval of the budget, and then we will submit the budget to City Council by July 1st. So on the first page, I'll give you a highlight and overview of both systems. On the electric side, we are budgeting an increase in revenue of $17 million. This is inclusive of a 1.2% increase in sales versus the FY 2018 budget. That's consistent with what we're seeing this year as we've had some new customer, we've had strong growth in new customer connections this year on both electric and water. And so we're seeing a slight uptick in sales, which is good. Both these budgets for electric and water, I'll note, have a 5% weather contingency in them. That's consistent with previous years. Weather is by far the largest driver of our sales from year to year, and so we have to build that into the budget. On the electric side, from a City of Jacksonville transfer perspective, we're budgeting $197 million for government transfers to the city from the electric system. That is a all-time high as well. On the O&M side, $5 million increase, or 2.3% versus last year's budget. Most of that is related to generating unit outages, planned outages in FY18, which is an increase of $4 million versus this year's budget. And then the remainder of that is related to bargaining unit increases and strategic initiatives, such as our enterprise asset management program, which the board has heard about previously. On the water side, we've got a budgeted $11 million increase from FY18. There's no change in sales contemplated in the FY19 budget. If you may recall, during FY18, we raised our sales for budget due to we under budgeted revenues. We under budgeted sales in FY16 and 17, and so we kind of caught up in FY18. And we think that where we are is appropriate for FY19 as well, even though we are seeing some growth. Again, there's the 5% weather contingency involved with that budget as well. On the City of Jacksonville transfers from the water system, we've got a $51 million budget from the water system, so it's $248 million total transfer. On O&M, a $5.7 million budgeted O&M increase. That is a 3.8% increase over FY18's budget. Most of this is bargaining unit increases as well as strategic initiatives. On the water side, that's mostly storm resiliency efforts in terms of getting pump stations with backup generators and pumps, and just increased staffing around our 24/7 operation. On the next page, page 3, on page 3, we give an overview of the transfers to the city from the JEA bill. Actually, this is total government transfers, including state transfers, but transfers to the city and the history of that over the last 10 years or so. The $248 million that I mentioned previously represents a 57% increase in total government transfers over the last 11 years, since 2007. Moving to capital, we have on the electric system, we've budgeted $335 million for CapEx in FY19. This includes, both of these capital budgets include a 10% contingency, so our internal target is $305 million. And you can see the funding for that in both systems. there's no new debt contemplated. Happy to report again. Most of that will be funded through current year revenues in each system. And so on the electric system, you can see on the funding line, prior year funds is $87 million. That reflects a withdrawal from our capital account. And so that's where that'll come from. On the projected metrics for each system on the electric side, we continue to see strong performance at 2.9 times debt service coverage expected for FY19, 63% debt to asset ratio, continuing to see that come down, and strong liquidity and a good reduction in our total debt. On the water side, we are budgeting a $248 million capital program. Again, $225 million is the internal target for that. And you can see the breakdown of funding for that program. In this case, it's on the water side, it's the $34 million withdrawal from the capital fund. And the credit metrics on the water side continue to reflect strong rating agency metrics, very supportive of our high ratings on the water side, and really in great shape financially. On the next page, for next steps.
Can I interrupt you, Ryan?
Yes.
You also had on your capital budget $5 million on district energy.
Yes.
What's going on in district energy? I don't recall hearing about.
So
CapEx there.
we do have, there's a couple things there. There's some work being done at the Springfield plant that serves Shands Hospital. There's some backup generation there for that facility, not for the hospital, but for the facility itself. And we also have some budgeted funds for future downtown development, which we have had in the budget for a number of years. So to the extent that we have another building, the stadium's been a perfect candidate. There's certain buildings downtown that could be candidates for future development, and so we've got funding for that.
Okay. So it's not targeted other than the Shands?
No. And that's a big one, though. I mean, that's about a $2 million project.
Thank you.
Yeah. So in terms of next steps, I'll open it up to the board's discussion, but we recommend that the board approve this budget and allow us to submit it to the council for approval or for their budget process. The other thing I'll point out here is, along with this approval, there's an approval of our share of the SGRPP and plant shear operating and capital budgets, which are incorporated into our budget as non-fuel purchase power items. The council does not approve those budgets, but the board does, and it's incorporated in our broader budget. And that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Questions regarding the budget to Mr. Wanamaker? Ms. Green?
You mentioned on the electric side that there was an uptick in the sales. Was that due to commercial or is that residential development?
It's a little bit of both. As we've seen, we're seeing a little over 2% customer growth this year. Actually, it's about 2%, 1.8, I think, on the electric side. But it's mixed. No real difference in terms of our overall customer distribution between commercial and residential.
Yeah, I asked the question only because of the impact of the solar. We've been talking about how we're expanding our solar customer, but then to see an uptake in sales on electric.
So I'm not sure I understand your question. Are you asking about the impact of solar on our sales?
Yes.
Yeah, so generally our growth has been outstripping the growth in solar in terms of the sales, not in terms of percentages. So certainly solar growth has been much larger, although it's starting from a much lower base.
Very good. Mr. Cumber?
Just a couple things. Can you remind me what capacity fees are that show up in revenue, as well as the
For
just in the budget for water and sewer? It's 24.5 million.
yeah, so
And it
those
just
are
runs out.
new connection. Anytime somebody connects to the system, they pay a capacity fee, and so that gets set aside for capital improvements to that are related to capacity additions within the system.
So like impact fees people are paying.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the St. Johns River Power Park, the revenue that you have there when it says operating revenue from JEA, that's just a transfer we're making in order to be able to continue to
Correct.
pay. Okay.
Yeah. So there will be we have some debt outstanding at SGRPP that we will continue to pay, and so we'll have to continue to SGRPP will continue as an entity, and we'll continue to fund that over time until that debt's paid off.
Just for clarity, that's a joint operation, obligation of JEA and FPL, and we're jointly funding the defeasance of those bonds, right?
So the debt outstanding is JEA's debt. The operations right now, what you saw Saturday, is jointly funded.
Okay.
And so once those environmental and demolition projects finish up, the only obligation for SGRPP at that point will be largely just that debt service on the outstanding bonds, and those are all JEA's obligation.
Because FP&L made the lump sum to us.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
And then I know you'd be upset if I didn't remind my board members that our natural gas business is proposed to make $46,000 in your budget. So, again, just questioning. I'd like to, at some point, have you guys come back and actually show us what we're doing in that business to justify being in it.
I would not expect any less.
Ms. Flanagan?
Ryan, can you walk us through one more time the capital expenditures on the electric system? I know the detail for the 335 that's budgeted in the upcoming year is detailed in the budget, but that is 140 million increase over the 18 forecast. Can you just help remind us what the substantive changes are year over year?
Absolutely. It's a great question. So there are two major projects within the capital budget next year for electric. One of them is the Brandy Branch upgrades. We are doing some upgrades to the latest version of the GE turbines out there. We're going to get some extra capacity out of that. It's about 84 megawatts of capacity that we're going to get out of that project. And so that's going to be about $80 million all said and done. And so that's one large project. The other large project is we've talked a lot about the storm hardening that we're doing. The increase in our AMI, our advanced metering technology, we've got about $20 million in the budget next year for increasing the pace of those meter changeouts.
Accelerated at the request of the board.
Correct. Yes.
Thank you.
And that's the bulk of the difference from year to year. The rest of it is more just ongoing R&R type activities.
Reverend Newbill, did you have any questions regarding the budget for Mr. Wanamaker?
No, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian, thank you for the presentation. Based on the recommendation of the board and from the Finance and Audit Committee, the chair asked for a motion to approve the operating and capital budgets for 2019, authorizing staff to transmit the recommended budgets to City Council for final action by July 1, 2018, and transmit the 5-year capital improvement plan as required by the City Planning Department. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
So move.
Thank you. I'll take that as a motion by Reverend Newbill, a second by Mr. Cumber. Is there any further discussion on that motion? Any additional questions for Mr. Wanamaker? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Passes unanimously. Then have a request for a motion approving JEA's share of the SJRPP and plant share operating capital budgets. I hear a motion.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Flanagan. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Any further questions on that motion? JEA's share of SJRPP and plant share operating capital budgets. Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Did I hear a vote from Ms. Green? Aye, sorry. Okay, unanimous. And then finally, authorizing the interim managing director and CEO to adjust the budget approved by the board of directors and submitted to council, if necessary, within the total approved budget amount for each system. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Thank you,
moved.
Ms. Green.
Second.
Thank you for the second, Reverend Newbill. Any questions regarding that? We do that each year to allow some latitude within the budget, as necessitated by changes in circumstances.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Just
Please.
when we say total approved budget amounts for each system, is that a reference to total revenue, net income, particular categories?
Yeah, I think it's within each electric, water, wastewater, and district energy, so on either side of the expense or revenue adjustments as may be required.
That's right, yes.
Any other questions? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. Passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Wanamaker. And I'd like to also thank Christina Quarterman and Lori Whitmer for all of their efforts on behalf of the JEA Budgeting Finance Department. Thank you, ladies, both of you. Are they here?
I don't
No?
know. if they're-
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, tell them thank you for us, and also
We
thank you to
certainly
Ms.
will.
Flanagan and her committee, Finance and Audit, and all the hours they put in as well.
I'm sure they are actively watching downstairs on stream. They're very interested parties in this discussion, so.
Thank you, ladies. Okay. Thank you very much, Ryan. Appreciate your efforts. Okay, next we have Ms. Brooks, the appointment of Wayne McGovern to the Civil Service Board. We do that?
Thank you. We do. We have 2 seats on a 9-member board of the Civil Service Board. The JEA appoints with confirmation by City Council. And Mr. McGovern is one of the appointees we would like to put forward through the process. I'd file the legislation if this board approves his appointment as one of the 2 members of the Civil Service Board.
And he's an employee of JEA in what department?
No, he's not an employee of JEA. Typically, we like former employees to sit on that board. Helen Kurt, who had been a long-term JEA employee, is rolling off. Her term ends June 30th. Mr. McGovern has been with the city of Jacksonville for the past 17 years with the civil service, or with the civil Equal Employment Access Specialist was his last role with the city. But he's agreed to be our appointee, and we believe he would be a good member that would be fair and impartial during those processes.
Is Mr. McGovern here?
I haven't seen him.
Okay, but you're sure he'll accept if appointed?
Yes, he
Okay.
would. And Angie may have more information about Mr. McGovern and his role, but.
Okay, great. It's not a paid position, though, right?
It is
Does
not.
he know that? Yeah.
It's voluntary, and they meet bi-weekly every other Thursday, and it is a pretty significant time commitment, and that board is very important. And to JEA, they hear grievances and employee complaints and those sorts of things, and we're governed by Article 17 of the city chapter under civil service rules.
Great. Well, thank you for that. So you're seeking a motion?
Motion to approve Mr. McGovern to go through the process of being our appointee to the Civil Service Board.
I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Flanagan. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Any other questions regarding this appointment?
Yeah, so you mentioned, maybe that's what you were thinking, Chair, that Ms. Kurt was a JEA employee, a former JEA employee. Just out of curiosity, was there not a former JEA employee that was interested in this appointment?
No, he has not
But
been a
she
JEA
was.
employee.
The
The
previous
current
person.
member had been a JEA employee for quite some time. And we typically like to get former JEA employees as our appointees, but we had no one that had expressed interest in being this appointed candidate.
Okay.
I'm sorry?
County limitations?
They have to they have to live in Duval
Duval
County. To participate as well. If we had some folks that lived in St. John's, Nassau, and Clay, they wouldn't qualify.
Very good. Any other questions regarding the motion to appoint Wayne McGovern to the Civil Service Board? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Is that an aye from you, Reverend Newbill?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
So if I just make one other comment, I know we have 2 appointments, so at some point there'll be another one that comes up. I'm not sure how we get the message out to former JEA employees, but it seems like it's a good opportunity. And so I would just encourage HR to be more aggressive in reaching out to former employees and gauging their interest.
William Hires is their other one. I think he just recently got appointed within the last year or so. So it's 2 3-year terms if they wish to stay on for 6 years. But a lot of times we lose them after the first 3 years.
Understood.
And, excuse me, and through the chair, and Tila Milton Johnson as well was appointed last summer.
Yeah.
Okay, next on the agenda is anything else regarding the Civil Service Board? Next on the agenda, Ms. Hires, Vice President, Chief Human Resources Officer, St. Johns River Power Park Systems Employee Retirement Plan. Ms. Hires.
Okay. Thank you, and good afternoon again. In your packets, if I'm not mistaken, behind Section 3E, you will find a submitted agenda item, the St. Johns River Power Park System Employees Retirement Plan Amendment 2. Periodically, there are amendments made to a plan for a number of reasons. One of the most common reasons is a change in IRS regulations or codes as it relates to retirement plans, as well as when there's been any type of operational changes to the plan. Due to the closure of the St. John Rivers Power Park, the retirement plan as it was has been closed. Thus, we'll need an amendment to that plan to actually state that. The reason that that is important is because in order for us to maintain our tax favorite status of this plan, we will need to submit that paperwork to the IRS to maintain that standing. With the closure of the St. John River Power Plant, they had a specific plan that was for them. Because they were not civil service employees or employees of the city of Jacksonville, they had a plan specific to the SJRPP employees. With the closure of that plant, this plan has been closed. The Amendment 2, as outlined in your packets, has some specifics as it relates to that amendment, but there are a couple that I want to point out. Accelerated vesting was a part of that amendment. No new participation in the plan is closed to all participants, and there are also some caveats as to how benefits might continue to accrue. The reason that those particular amendments are there is because we do have employees who are now JEA employees. However, they were allowed to remain in that particular plan. But that plan is, however, closed to any and all new participants. This was presented to you at this board meeting for your review and for information. However, we would like for you to consider this for approval at the July board meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Hires. Any question at this time? Then I direct management to please place this on the agenda for our next meeting. You're still on the clock. We also have the JEA 457 deferred comp plan.
Okay. This too is a plan update that is needed to ensure IRS compliance. This was also connected with the SJRPP plant closure. Back in the fiscal year 2012-2013, the SJRPP pension plan went through pension reform. And as a part of that overall reform, employees were offered a contribution and a match to the 457 plan. So now that the plan has been closed and that plan is no longer available to new participants, it will be administered differently. And this plan document also has to reflect that operational change. So both of these amendments is to make sure from a governing perspective of the IRS that any operations that are conducted in any administration applicable to that plan is reflective in the plan documents, and these amendments will serve to do that.
Thank you.
So once again, it's for information with approval at the July board meeting by the board.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hires. Any questions for Ms. Hires at this time on that second SJRPP plan? Then I'd ask management to include this for action at the next board meeting. Thank you, Ms. Hires.
Okay, well, Steve McAnall is anxiously awaiting his arrival at the table.
Somebody wake him up.
Thank you, Angie.
Mr. McAnall, welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Board. I'm here to present the 10-year site plan. It's a document that we submit annually to the Public Service Commission. Oh, so this is due April 1st. It went in prior to April 1st. And it provides information related to our needs and our generation capacity. The Public Service Commission uses it to look at every system in the state and make sure that on a statewide basis there's adequate resources to serve the entire state. So, and you've got a copy of this document. It should have been in your inboxes. Looks kind of like this. Looks exactly like that. So this is just a brief overview of the, what's in there. So we look at each of the our facilities and also our forecasts for demand and energy, as well as public or plug-in electric vehicles and energy efficiency, fuel price. It's a pretty wide-ranging look, and we go out 10 years into the future. You've seen versions of this graph in other presentations. It gets repeated quite a bit. What you don't see is the prior to 2008, we were in the 3% annual growth region. And because of the timing of the power plant timing cycle, planning cycle, we at that time had planned to have much more demand and energy needs at this point. So as a result, we were substantially oversubscribed as far as our capacity, which is why we decommissioned St. Johns River Power Park recently, and you'll see the impact of that on the next page. Our forecast going forward is very moderate. It's slightly above flat. Energy and demand both in that 0.5% to 1% range, and that's very consistent with other utilities in the state. All right, here's what I was just talking about as far as seeing the impact of St. Johns River Power Park. So up until that point through 2017, we had substantially more generation than our demand really needed. I used to tell people we were 70% coal and 70% gas, and got a funny look, kind of like that. Now we are exactly about 60% gas and 40% coal. And then with renewables starting to have an impact. We did see an increase now in the capacity factor. That tracks how much of the plant, how much of our system capacity we use at any given time. That's always going to be close to that 50% number until there's substantial amounts of storage, because we build for the peak and run at the average. So by definition, it's going to be about half. This is just a quick snapshot of our capacity and energy. 2017 on the left, 2027, 10 years out on the right. And you do see in 2027, I think it was the extra page that was placed to be put in your books, there's a 5% slice in 2027 energy that is from the large solar that we're currently in the process of awarding.
Yeah, this was at everyone's chair that has the updated table that has the 20% on it.
Traditionally, we don't include it until we sign the PPAs, so I didn't have it in, and during the walkthrough this morning, we decided to put it in. So it is a 5% slice, and it comes out of the really out of the solid fuel and the gas diesel CTs. It kind of displaces that. So since we're down to exactly where we need to be, we're pretty active now. Any growth that we have, we need to pick up additional capacity for. Brian mentioned we do have the Brandy Branch upgrades coming. That'll add 83 megawatts in the summer, 57 in the winter. We go out for seasonal power purchase agreements. We signed an annual purchase agreement with Southern Power Wansley plant for 2018 and 2019. That fills in 200 megawatts. We do still show Vogel coming on in 2021 and 2022, and pretty much other purchases lined up. And the big thing we're working on right now is an integrated resource planning study. So this really is a precursor to next year's 10-year site plan. Some of the things we're looking at are potential retirements of assets, including the Northside diesels, potentially Northside 3, and then potential additions. Anything that we retire now, we're going to have to offset with firm capacity to replace, to make sure that all of our customers' needs are met. Any retirements as far as impacting personnel, we would reassign those people in the company. And we're looking at how to integrate the solar. 300 megawatts of solar requires a significant amount of balancing. So there may be assets we need to add as far as small engines to help integrate that into the system. And as well as transmission and gas utility upgrades are also part of the conversation. So it's a very comprehensive look at the at how we serve our load and our needs. And I said I'd do this in 5 minutes, and I think I got there. So
Did pretty well, Steve. Questions for Mr. McEnall on the 10-year site plan? What were the assumptions, Steve, on the electrification and PEV, for example, and any assumptions on utility scale battery storage?
well, we don't have any utility scale battery storage included yet. It is certainly something that's part of the IRP process. Electrification, we look at each of the, as far as electric vehicles, we look at adoption rates, we look at the plans of each of the electric car manufacturers, and there's a section in the report that deals with that. It's still not a significant driver of demand, but it's something that needs to be incorporated in our look, because eventually it does become significant, or it can be.
Okay. Other questions, Ms. Flanagan? Ms. Green? Reverend Newbill, any questions for Mr. McEnall regarding the 10-year plan?
No, sir, I'm fine.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks,
Mr. McEnall. Appreciate that.
Thanks.
We'll turn to item 4A on the agenda, shareholder framework. Mr. Zahn.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair and Board. So the shareholder framework is a concept that was discussed with each of you back in April, and then really identified a need for alignment of the community, principally the City Council and Mayor, with the initiatives of the Board and management team over the last decade. So part and parcel with that, what I've outlined here is a collaborative timeline starting back in April 17. I have sat down with each one of the City Council members one-on-one and reviewed this concept and kind of walked it through from a conceptual framework perspective, and what you have in front of you is effectively a first draft. And what we said was we would take the first pen and try and draft something that would frame up in concept what could be a measuring stick and a collaborative messaging tool for our next 10-year strategic plan. As it's framed up, and I'm not going to go through the entire document, because really what this conversation is to introduce it to the Board, allow you the time over the next coming weeks to review it in thorough detail, and provide comment back to the management team so that we can then work with the balance of the senior leadership to integrate the Board's comments and our senior leadership's comments, and then bring it back one more time for final discussion with the Board, hopefully in July. If it doesn't happen in July, we can move it into August. I don't think there's a set time frame on this. What you'll notice in the construct, it is written in a resolution format, just because that is a format that is familiar to City Council. So it doesn't necessarily need to be in a resolution format. It could be more of a letter framework or something else that was just something, from a drafting perspective, chose to take that format. The first section is really just a conversation. Section number 1, after all the recitals, is really a conversation on the fact that JEA is going to undertake an update to a 10-year strategic plan, and making sure that, in fact, there's an alignment on that. The second section is this concept of helping the City Council understand and the reality of there being two hats. One hat as a customer advocate, and constituent advocate. The second hat is as a shareholder trustee. You've heard me talk about this with the city council at the subcommittee meetings as well as at their main meetings. The reality is the city council does have some approval rights over budget, debt limits, divestitures, new business lines, many of the things that have been discussed in terms of as we move forward, things that need to be revisited. So the second section is the shareholder trustee framework. It's intended for it's intended to be a section where someone can put, and I'm going to say this in a figurative way, their shareholder hat on. What do they expect out of JEA from a financial and operational success perspective? Because they are truly invested in the business of JEA, and this is a guideline. The sections 3, 4, and 5 are now breaking out the major business lines of JEA: electric, water, wastewater, and then other. And really, what those are intended to do is saying, in light of meeting all of the demands as a shareholder, what are some of the things that we could strive to accomplish, while also making sure that we are achieving success from a shareholder perspective. Again, it's intended, those lists are aspirational in some places. Certainly the water and sewer expansion, which we've talked about and we'll talk a little bit more about, is a $2 or $3 billion issue that's been discussed ad nauseum by the community over a number of decades. That JEA at this time is looking to be a thought leader on, but isn't necessarily going to bear the burden of it. But that's the construct of the document that you have in front of you, and as I said, what I'm hoping is that the timeline would be a collaborative work product between management, the board of directors, and the city council, and would engage these board members while working with those city council members to create an alignment so that we can use the better part of October of 18 to October of 19 to update a strategic plan with a clear consensus around a measuring stick of where we're going.
I'm going to pause there and seek input. I'm going to do you a favor, Ms. Green. I'm going to start with Ms. Flanagan, catch her off guard. Any comments or responses, thoughts, Ms. Flanagan?
Not at this time, thank you.
Mr. Cumber?
Yeah, I'm still trying to get my head around this concept a little bit. From the standpoint of, as a side note, before we finish getting comments, I'd love to, get our council liaison's thoughts on this as well, as I see he's back. So I guess I'm struggling with us putting something on a piece of paper that we send to city council to send back to us, as opposed to us as a board sending a letter to city council saying, in your responsibility as representatives of the community, here are the principles that the board believes we should keep front of mind as we begin our strategic process. If you have any additional thoughts, let us know. But it seems a little weird to me to, draft a resolution to send to city council to send back to us. I can't get my head around what we're trying to accomplish. And maybe part of what the responsibilities of this board has to also recognize is, look, I went through the reappointment process, and I've got 2 nominees that will go through the appointment process, and there are certain city council members that will say it as a joke, but I'm sure they're serious when they say it, is I see JEA board members when they're going through the appointment process, and the next time I see JEA board members is they're going through the reappointment process. So maybe it's incumbent on us as a board to have more interaction with the city council members directly as, their representatives and the mayor's representatives to JEA. I'm trying to get my head around this, and I haven't gotten around it. I feel like we should be taking the leadership in stating what we believe are the core tenets and focus areas for JEA and communicating that, as opposed to asking city council to communicate that back to us.
I think that's good feedback. Ms. Green?
I guess for me, I guess I'm understanding the format of as a resolution. Are we in potentially adopting this while we're going through the process of searching for a new CEO that may have some additional input, understanding that it's not specific in terms of day-to-day operation, and it may not be specific in terms of, but we are talking about incorporating this into our strategic plan. So, like Board Member Cumber, are we, by going out and getting our cooperative responses from our city council members, is this something that should be done in-house before we present it to city council?
I think it's,
Especially in the stage that we're in right now of seeking a new CEO.
I think that's really good feedback. Reverend Newbill?
I'm still listening right now.
Okay, sir. I echo the comments and concerns expressed by Mr. Cumber and Ms. Green. I think that we need to keep in mind that under our city council charter, under our city charter, we're an independent authority. With all due respect to city council and the administration, we have certain independent responsibilities to the community, which overlap but are distinct from those of city council and the administration. So Mr. Zahn has explained to me that he's looking to, and I don't want to speak for you, he's looking to achieve buy-in, so it's not our resolution as a board, but a city council resolution to get buy-in on the concepts of strategic process, shareholder framework, and customer advocacy that he's articulated in this resolution, and I applaud that. I do think that one of the things that came out very clearly over the last 6 months is the potential disconnect and resulting discord in the community from a misalignment or perhaps just a misperception of aligned goals. If you don't have a clear understanding of what the community expects, it's hard to build a business plan around that. So I applaud Mr. Zahn for thinking in those terms. I do recognize and agree that city council in particular wears two hats. He uses the term shareholder trustee and customer advocate in his proposal. I might use different terms, but I think the concepts are valid. However, I do underscore the fact that there is an independence element to our authority. The original charter for the city of Jacksonville describes JEA as an independent authority. And while we may be subject to appointment by the board and confirmation by the city council, once we sit at this table, we have the authority as it pertains to JEA business. They don't. So we screw up, it comes back to us, guys. So I'm sensitive to that as well, and also to the timing in terms of the permanent CEO search. I see Ms. Furman leaning forward back there. The reality is that, and I said it earlier, if you're not going forward, you're going backwards. The organization needs to be moving forward and looking forward even as we're engaged in a CEO search. I don't think we can put everything on pause. This is something that needs to be done. This being a engagement of our stakeholders and a strategic plan moving forward. I firmly believe that. I support interim director or interim CEO Zahn in his efforts to do that. And I think if it's done correctly, if you solicit the feedback and input from all of the stakeholders in crafting that plan, it shouldn't matter who's sitting in that seat to execute on that plan, because if you've done it correctly, the input and feedback you get from each of those stakeholders shouldn't change based on who's sitting in the chair to execute it. So that's my personal thought on the timing. I will tell you that I probably lean a little more in favor of Mr. Cumber than Mr. Zahn in the suggestion of, is this something that we craft and present as having as a proposed adoption of a plan for shareholder engagement, stakeholder engagement at the board level, and present for comment and feedback, I think you said. I probably lean more in that favor than drafting the resolution. Personally, I think it's hard, and so Mr. Schellenberg, I think it's hard to get support over across the street from 13 or 14 councilmen. Unless any other directors have an objection, I will invite Councilman Schellenberg to just sort of give his just off-the-cuff initial responses or thoughts. You're our liaison. We're interested in your wisdom, sir.
Sit down so people can hear me, unless
Please.
you want me to go over there.
No, you're fine.
Okay, great. I think it's interesting. I have been involved sort of on the peripheral on JEA, even though I'm recently the liaison the last year. And I think that when you're dealing with 19 people that don't understand everything that's going over at JEA, you can have 19 different opinions. I look at it that we are shareholders, and shareholders do have impact somewhat, but it's the board and the administration of any corporations that guide the process going forward. I think going forward, I think a better relationships with each of the council people on a periodic basis with the administration, the leadership of this JEA, would be a better place to be than doing the resolution. I've suggested this even to the administration on the fourth floor, that I think that we would be better off if we would meet periodically every quarter or so for 10, 15 minutes just to find out what's going on. And if the council person wants to engage in a further conversation with JEA, they're welcome to sit out here, just like any committee person on city council. We have 7 members, but anybody can show up and we can have a conversation. So I read the resolution. I appreciate the direction that you would like to have guidance, but sometimes guidance means you know the material. And I don't think we know the material as well as the board is, and of course the administration. You are the leaders that we have appointed you, and I tend to agree with Mr. Cumber that we probably only see the board members once in a while. But that's part of our problem. I think that sometimes the city council don't realize the influence and power that they have, that they could probably call up any board member and talk to them at any time, as I have done with you, Mr. Howard and Mr. Cumber, and I occasionally talk to some of you just at various meetings. That's what we should be doing. And if they have a problem, they should be going directly to Mr. Zahn or the board members to voice their concern, not in the press, but because we don't know, and what we're doing is trying to get information. So I appreciate the reach out, but I think better communication from your side to our side is probably more beneficial than the resolution.
I appreciate that. I will commend Mr. Zahn over the last 2 months for having gone and met individually with each and every council member. I think that goes a long way towards building goodwill on behalf of JEA, so thank you on behalf of the board for undertaking that. This is a discussion. He said it at the beginning of the meeting. We're at the section of our agenda where board members get to talk about ideas and concepts. It's an idea that management has brought to us, and he's not personally offended if we don't execute it exactly the way he's presented it, I don't think.
May I?
Yeah, talk.
I actually love this. This is exactly what we need to be doing, because the reality is when I reflect back, upon my experience, companies and organizations often fail or get paralyzed when you have 3 issues. When your shareholders are misaligned with your board, when your shareholders are misaligned with your management, and when your management's misaligned with its board. And those are 3 major issues. And I know that JEA doesn't, in the quintessential sense, have shareholders. But we do have a set of stakeholders that have a specific set of powers that they hold, both in the nomination and appointment of the actual board members themselves, as well as in some of the financial covenants and other things that, in terms of the company runs. And what I like about this is look, part of my leadership is offering up something that I'm perfectly willing to be thrown away. but I'm doing it in a way where this board can actually talk about it. And if the board decides, hey, really what we ought to do is take this and redraft it in more of a we, the board statement, believe these are the measuring sticks that we're going to use to move forward. Great. That's wonderful too, and I'd welcome the direction. So I think that's exactly what this strategy discussion is for, and I really appreciate the feedback.
Because
Mr.
I think what would be helpful is, to me, if we communicated what our collective thoughts are and what the priorities are going into the strategic review, and then offer up to all 19 councilors, 17 right now, 17 council members, the opportunity to meet with each one of us, or we could decide as a board, because we do have full-time jobs, and I respect that we split up, the council. And that way, going into the strategic review, we are also collectively bringing back the feedback that we've had from those meetings. Because I think that's the challenge, right? The challenge that you're trying to address, Mr. Zahn, is, from my perspective, a feeling that city council does not have the ability to weigh in on at these important moments when they take place. If I heard, one consistent theme from the JEA Special Committee, that was it. But for asking someone to come before their committee, we weren't actively going in front of the city council to brief them. So to me, that then allows us to say, here are our core principles. If you think we've missed something, this is your opportunity to tell us what we've missed. We will talk about it as a board. But I also don't want this to become a process where a resolution gets passed, next week, and 6 months later somebody says, wait a minute, I have 3 other ideas that I just popped up with, and I should introduce another resolution at city council to make sure that the board has those 3 issues at top of mind. That's not how this board should want to be governed, right? We should want to be governed in a way where you have the confidence of the city council and the mayor, and that's why you're here. And so for us to turn that around and say, we don't have confidence in ourselves as a board and in setting the strategy based on the communication we're having, and on a regular basis feel free to pass a resolution, I think is just the wrong message to send.
I sense a consensus. Somebody tell me if I'm wrong, that we want to take this and recraft it as positioned by the board of JEA, and seek input, but it'll actually be a board position. What you give up in that, in fairness to Mr. Zahn, and a point that he made in crafting this, is it was an effort to have buy-in from city council, so that you could say, look, we're doing what you guys said we could do. And you lose a little bit of that when we draft it and give them an opportunity to take shots at it, because then they don't own it. It's not theirs. It's not their resolution. So I'm fine with that, but I will point out that that was one of the, I think, key items you were looking for in getting it as a city council position.
But it does underscore the independence of the authority and the independence of the board and management team to run this authority. And I think Board Member Cumber's point is a good one, which is some of that could be softly brought back by taking that statement and then collaboratively working with board members, myself and a board member, breaking up the 19 and bringing feedback, from a July through October period, and saying, here's what we've addressed, here's what we haven't addressed, and being able to publicly state why certain things may be left off as well.
I think that's right.
So.
Okay, this is a really long meeting. I apologize to everyone in attendance. We'll move on to the next agenda item, governance and delegation of authority.
Yeah, so the governance, one of the things that we spoke about also in April is the need to potentially solidify some of the corporate governance elements of JEA, their delegation of authority, a standard corporate documentation. There are a lot of policies in place already from a procurement process, and as well as many detailed policies that have worked very well for JEA. But what we're doing as a management team and working with Jody and John McCarthy did a wonderful job on this, is framing up a broader delegation of authority. Now, what's presented to the board today is really where it stands. This is for information purposes only, and again, for you to review over the next month. If you see something that you would like to talk about, feel free to give me a call. Otherwise, what we plan to do between now and July is take this document, frame it up as a broader corporate delegation of authority document that incorporates all of the existing policies and procedures, as well as contemplates some succession planning elements that were identified during the interim element in the February, March, April timeframe.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So moving on to the transition update. The board's seen this slide at least 4 times, maybe 5. This is blocking out really where we sit in that 12 to 18 month transition plan that was introduced in April. We have, I think, very successfully navigated into stability with JEA over the last 8 weeks. And now we're really in that conversation of the shareholder framework, as well as setting the foundation for a permanent CEO and for a strategic planning process, as well as for launching kind of the next phase. So this is really just an update and then blocking out some of the, where I see kind of the major blocks of time and efforts being in terms of stepping stones.
Questions or comments on the transition update? Okay, let's talk about Southside capital allocation.
Yep, and also just one other element, we have actually launched a management listening tour, so our senior leadership is actively started on June 8th and is taking through June 8th to October 1st of engaging 3 major stakeholder groups. The first being our employees, customers, and many of the community members. The second being this board and ourselves, actually, kind of an introspective look. And then the third is really the city council and the mayor, and really that's kind of solidified in that shareholder framework concept. What we plan on doing as a management team, and we've already had a number of wonderful listening tour sessions out at Northside, down in Mandarin Wastewater Facility, here at the Customer Care Center, soliciting the feedback of employees, and I got to tell you, it's really nice to be out in front of the people that drive our company forward day in and day out and hear their feedback. I'd like to reserve providing any color on that feedback just yet, because our plan is to collect all of it and then play it back as an aggregate at sometime in the September-October timeframe, if that's okay.
Sure. I'd like to ask the indulgence of the board. I think hurricane readiness is probably, given the hour, probably a subject of more urgency than maybe the Southside capital allocation. Is there any reason we can't push that to the July board meeting, Southside capital? We haven't closed yet. Did you get the money yet, Nancy? No? Okay.
No,
we can push it.
I did speak with Elements. We can push. They are targeting closing on time.
Yep.
There is one element, which is the CDD setup, which may have an impact on their schedule, and my hope is to get some additional information on that. So it might be actually more appropriate in July, although I may have to speak with the board ahead of time, because I think the targeted closing date is July 16th.
16th, yeah.
And so there may be, in the event of a modification of that contract in order to accommodate the CDD, would that require board approval?
They have made a request that we approve their going forward with the CDD approval process, and we've given them a letter of authorization to do that. That didn't require any kind of a board approval action. I wasn't under the impression that would slow down the closing, but you must have had a conversation.
Just today.
Okay.
But I don't know if I'm not saying it will, but in the event that it does, would that require a board approval action?
That would, if there's an amendment to change the closing date, yes.
And could that be taken under like a unanimous written consent format? I know that's not typically done at JEA.
No.
So given the fact that our board meeting is not till after the proposed close date, how would that handle?
That would have to be an emergency meeting.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, with everybody to amend the agenda to push that? Right.
Do you need a motion for that, or?
No, we're just going to
push.
defer it. And then Ms. Dykes, hurricane readiness, far more important. very important. I like the 18 million. This is important too.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I am sensitive to you and the rest of the board members being 2 hours and 45 minutes into this afternoon. And so Ed and I are going to endeavor to present this information in a condensed format, but that still gets the key information across to board members.
Thank you.
I would also like to take the opportunity to introduce Ed Dendor. Ed is our Director of Emergency Preparedness. This is his full-time job. Ed is focused 100% of the time on making sure that JEA is ready, not only for hurricane season, but for anything that comes our way, both in terms of storm preparedness and in terms of business continuity work. And so I'm delighted that Ed has agreed to present this information with me this morning.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you. We're glad you're laying awake at night worrying about this, so we don't have to.
I do, actually. That's the sad part.
Our community was hit by 2 hurricanes in less than a year, which for most of us in the community, whether they're with JEA or not, kind of rocked our world. The good news is we learned a lot. We learned a lot from Hurricane Matthew, which we fed into our response to Hurricane Irma. It allowed us to improve our processes. We mobilized a massive workforce in response to Hurricane Irma. And it allowed JEA to restore power faster after Hurricane Irma than any other major city in Florida. And we're very proud of that performance. But there's still a lot that we learned. So we're taking everything that we learned from Hurricane Irma and feeding that into continuous improvement so that we can make our response even better going forward. We've hardened the electric and the water and sewer systems. We'll talk about that just a little bit going forward. We're implementing technology advancements to both speed recovery and improve our communication processes with our customers. And we're improving our overall communications with customers and the community. This presentation is divided into 3 major sections. We start with before the storm, which is really focused on all the things that we're doing to prepare. We've got a section that's called during the storm, and that's really focused on more of the uncertainties, things that can happen during a storm that we don't necessarily have fully baked mitigation plans for, but that board members should be aware of the risks around. And then we've got a section called after the storm, which is going to focus on educating board members about what's changed about our communications processes after we get hit with a storm. And let's knock on wood and hope that this is the best preparation that never gets used. I'm going to turn it over to Ed to kick off the before the storm section.
Okay, that's fine. I appreciate it. Through the board, through the chair. Before the storm, JEA integrates our emergency planning process with the Duval County by implementing what's known as the National Incident Management System, or NIMS. This is a systematic structure based on the National Response Framework. It aligns our response and recovery efforts quite well with the city's unified response and unified command. JEA's Incident Command Team actually works out of JEA's Emergency Operations Center, and it's very scalable, flexible, and capable in adapting to the changing conditions, again, before, during, and as well as after the storm. The process integrates JEA very well into the city of Jacksonville, the surrounding counties, as well as the state's emergency management office as well, which is sometimes where we need to go to get various resources. By using this methodology, JEA has implemented essentially the best industry standards and practices. JEA systematically approaches our lessons learned from an incident, as well as our training exercise. There's a lot of lessons learned to be garnered from that. So the opportunities we find, we can actually apply and reaffirm those lessons. All the lessons applied help maintain good lines of communications amongst all the agencies, resulting in really a well-choreographed joint agency operation and tactics. All the collaborative work is in an effort really to effectively minimize the impact from the storm and also to get our services restored as safely and as quickly as possible. This year, similar to we have done in recent years, JEA joined forces with the city for a 5-day hurricane exercise. We participated with other partners throughout the city, such as the Jacksonville Emergency Preparedness Division, the United States Coast Guard, Baker County's Emergency Preparedness Division, Florida Highway Patrol, the National Weather Service, the Northeast Florida Regional Planning Council, and the list goes on and on. We call it the alphabet soup. The more we get, the merrier. The exercise took months of planning. It occurs in the entire first week of May. Along with JEA, the city's emergency management staff helped plan the exercise, and as well as actively participated in each day's scenario, so it just wasn't us alone. And at this platform, actually, I'd like to take the opportunity to publicly recognize and appreciate and thank Duval County's Emergency Preparedness Division for helping us and working with us in the collaborative effort we do have. So now I'd like to go ahead and actually start a short 2-minute video to kind of give you an idea what that exercise actually looked like during that week.
This year, JEA's Incident Command held day 3 of its hurricane exercise in a large conference room in a Category 5 rated building. The Incident Command will hunker down here if a storm is severe enough.
And now that we're in a remote location, this is an opportunity for us to exercise what if we aren't able to operate in our normal methods, in our normal buildings with our normal comforts, to really push the envelope to find what are we missing.
As part of this annual exercise, JEA added something new to the mix, a major environmental disaster. In the scenario, a piece of flying metal punctured a diesel storage tank at Kennedy Generating Station, which left diesel fuel leaking into the St. Johns River.
If this were a real situation, which could happen during a hurricane, gray sky, then that would add a layer of complexity on the operations that take place here at the ELC.
Hurricane restoration is a team effort. That's why JEA invited some important players to its 5-day exercise, including the city's Chief of Emergency Preparedness.
And make sure that as a community, we're working together, you're exercising your plans. We're here to talk about what the city does and how we interact, and getting everyone prepared for the season.
Preparedness is key. It's the best possible protection against the dangers and discomforts associated with a big storm.
These exercises are such an important piece of our overall preparedness. They allow us to, in real time, exercise scenarios that might come during a storm to make sure our employees are comfortable with the battle rhythm and are comfortable with responding in real time if we were to get hit by a storm.
So that gives you some flavor for the exercise that we go through, not only this year, but every year as we prepare for storm season. And again, storm season did begin on June 1st. I'm going to talk for a couple minutes about the preparedness activities that are underway in the electric system and the water and sewer system, and with respect to technology and customer communications. I'm up here really as a spokesperson for the really great work that's going on the teams of the people that are sitting in the audience behind me. Mike and Brian and Carrie and Paul Cosgrave and John McCarthy and the whole rest of the leadership team really own this work that's going on and are deeply committed to making sure that we continue to provide reliable service to our community no matter what comes our way. In the electric system, our preparation for storm season is year-round, and it's year-round through the installation of advanced equipment to improve restoration times, pole replacements, tree trimming, and other storm hardening programs, and by improving our undergrounding programs, which allow existing neighborhoods to convert from overhead to underground. One example of the advanced equipment installation is our outage duration reduction program that we mentioned during our metrics readout earlier this afternoon. It's a $30 million program that's over the next 4 years, and it's specifically geared toward reducing outage duration. The components include automatic reclosers and switches, fault current indicators, and trip savers. They're pieces of equipment that we can install in the electric distribution system that essentially make it more self-healing. Think of things like if you had a circuit breaker in your home, every once in a while you get a switch that flips and you go and switch it back and everything's fine and continues to work. Well, some of this equipment will essentially switch it back for you. And if everything's fine, then all of a sudden you've self-healed the grid and saved somebody having to make a trip to make that repair. Those are the kinds of equipment that are being installed to help with reduction of outage duration. We also are expanding our two-way meter deployment, which we touched on earlier in this meeting. This is part of the advanced equipment that we're installing in the system to give us better visibility into what's going on with our individual customers. We're about halfway finished with deployment of two-way meters. And these meters give us way more than just outage information. They allow us to do prepaid service. We can do remote connect, disconnect through two-way meters. We can look for abnormal voltage and tampering, and if we get to a deployment of a demand rate, two-way meters are going to be critical to that deployment. You heard this morning, I'm not going to touch on tree trimming. There's no way I could talk about this as well as the team that you heard from this morning. This is part of our DNA and something we take very seriously at JEA. It's also the best way that we can improve reliability of the overhead distribution system. This next page is meant to provide some background information for board members, just for information. One of the questions that we heard after the last two storms is, how in the heck could you have told somebody their power was back on when it wasn't? And it's something that we've addressed and fixed going forward, so we can avoid those kinds of situations. But this is just as background information, what was going on and why that occurred. It was because of something in the distribution system called masking. So in our distribution system, it's essentially a connectivity model that gives us visibility into what's going on. And in this masking situation, you've got the substation, you've got something that happened on a line that was some distance from a substation, and then another separate event that happened behind that first event. So when our crews went out and did repairs on that circuit, they repaired the first event that they knew about, and they knew about that one because of all the customers behind that event that were out. When they repaired that one event, there still remained an outage cause that had not been repaired and had not been picked up on because of the way our connectivity model works. We, through our new processes that we're rolling out for this storm season and through the Restoration 1, 2, 3 communications process in particular, we'll be able to avoid the situation going forward. But that masking is what was causing the incorrect communication to customers during the last storm. This is just a little background on our underground conversion program. Underground generally works better during a storm than overhead. It's generally more stable during a storm situation. And since 1970, all the new developments in Jacksonville are going in underground. We do have a way I'm going to flip forward a page. We do have a way, though, that we've developed in partnership with the city in 2007 for existing neighborhoods to go underground and a funding mechanism to allow that to happen. It was set up under city ordinance, again in 2007, and it's essentially a financing mechanism where customers can choose to pay upfront or over time and elect to underground their neighborhood. We've got 5 neighborhoods that have taken advantage of this program in the past, and we're exploring ways to enhance this program to make it even better by using JEA staff to help facilitate some of the neighborhood communications and help to facilitate, in particular, getting the approvals from the neighborhoods that are required to move forward with these kinds of programs in the future. In water and wastewater, our resiliency program is built around hardening electric service to pump stations and expanding backup capability in case power is interrupted to pump stations. And we'll talk about both of those a little bit. This next chart gives you a feel for backup power coverage at pump stations. By the end of this year, we'll have about half of our pump stations that are covered by backup power on site in case electricity is interrupted to that pump station. And those, of course, will cover the largest volume pump stations. By 2022, our target is to have more than 3/4 of our pump stations that have backup power on site. And one of the things that's worth noting is that JEA is unique. This is your cocktail party fact of the day. JEA is unique in that it has more pump stations than any other wastewater utility in the country. We're up to 1,419 pump stations, and so that's a lot of pump stations that have exposure to the electric system and a lot of pump stations that require backup power for resiliency. We're also looking at hardening power supply to pump stations to prevent them from losing power to begin with. We're doing that through 2 main vehicles. One is actually undergrounding the lateral service to the pump station. So we're undergrounding places where there's overhead lines and it's vulnerable. We also are getting aggressive with vegetation management around our pump stations to be able to shore up electric service. We have developed some communications with our customers to help them work with us to, again, keep that water and wastewater system resilient through storm events. And one of the things that we've developed is communications to ask customers to work with us by minimizing water usage during the days leading up to a storm event and immediately after. And by minimizing water usage, they're essentially minimizing wastewater usage as well. So if we can cut down on the volume of wastewater, especially in that high impact time period, then that'll really help with the resilience of the system. We also encourage folks to stay out of standing water, and we've got pre-developed communications to the extent boil water advisories are needed. By leveraging advances in technology, we're now able, as of this storm season, to provide better information to customers through our JEA.com applications on outages specifically in their area. We've got better visibility into specific outage information, essentially through all that the advanced equipment that we talked about on the electric system. And we're utilizing a very sophisticated work management system to allow us to manage the massive workforce that we have the ability to stand up to do power restoration. We are continuing implementation of technology projects, again, to improve customer visibility and communication through a storm event. One mitigation activity that's not yet completed, but that I wanted to bring board members' attention to, is our data center migration. Our data center was a risk during the last 2 storms, since our primary data center is located in this building and the building next door. It is located downtown in the tower in the customer center. Our backup data center is located out on the west side. And it's worth noting for this conversation that although our community felt the effects of 2 hurricanes in less than a year, we didn't actually get directly hit by a hurricane, which is a little bit of a sobering reminder given all the hardships that our community experienced. One of the decisions we made coming out of those 2 storms was that it was time for us to move that data center into a much more storm-hardened, secure data center facility. That migration is underway. It does take time. It's essentially turning a battleship. And so we expect to have that migration finished by September of 2019. Going into this storm season, we have conducted intensive employee training to make sure that our employees are up to speed on some of these communication changes in particular that we'll be rolling out for this season. Our messaging focus is on education, but we also have some very specific calls to action for our community to prepare with us. JEA spends a lot of time preparing for storm season, and we invite our community to prepare with us. Customers can do that by updating their contact information on JEA.com. They can download the storm recovery guide. They can sign up for outage alert preferences, and that's how we'll know how to communicate with them during a storm event. And then once a storm passes, they can get information about their outages through JEA.com. This is a recap of the multimedia campaign. We're going to be reaching customers through a variety of channels, and you'll start to see those communications ramp up in July. One of the ways that we reach customers, again, is by partnering with our media outlets. We are also working to inform not just our customers, but our shareholders through this process. We have an event scheduled for tomorrow morning in the Customer Center here at JEA, where we've invited city council members and members of the administration to come and join us and hear more about not only what we've done to prepare for the storm season, but things that they can be tuned into in terms of being able to communicate better with their constituents about preparedness. During the storm, we work around the clock, but as I mentioned, I'm going to use this section to highlight some areas where risk mitigation remains a work in progress for us. And I'll start with our lovely venue. During the last 2 storms, we experienced in these buildings some flooding in the basement, some water intrusion, actually very significant water intrusion in this building, especially as we lost part of the roof. Our elevators malfunctioned, the roof partially blew off, and all of that was from 2 storms that were not a hurricane. If there were a direct hit, there are additional risks from a business continuity perspective to these particular buildings that we operate in. We've got 800 employees that call these buildings home every day. And there are some things that could happen as a result of being hit by a hurricane that would impact our ability to restore to the community. The biggest impact on the restoration is the introduction of a higher degree of risk around being able to restore power quickly. In other words, there's a risk that there may be delays in restoration because our coordination efforts come from our EOC, which is located in these buildings. There's also a risk around our ability to communicate with our customers. One of the things that we're proud of is that the call center that we stood up after Hurricane Irma, we stood up with employees who don't do call center day to day. They come in from all over the organization and do a phenomenal job answering phones and being able to connect with our customers. Our average wait time after Hurricane Irma on the phone was 2 minutes. And that's by design. We know people don't want to sit on the phone when they're having their just terrible experiences at home with service. If we were to lose these buildings, we do have a backup call center site. It's less than 25% the size of the site here, and so we are very likely looking at very long hold times for customers as they try to get in touch with us after a storm. So those are just some of the risks that we have around this campus. We do have a backup site. We have a backup EOC. If we get hit by a storm that's big enough that we can't remain here, we'll go there. It is substantially smaller, and it's off-site. So there's communication gaps that could form as a result of that. And of course, our inability to get back in this building could represent a business continuity risk. So I'm flagging that as a risk. It's one that we've studied mitigations for, but we do not currently have a mitigation plan in place. In that same bucket of risks, we do study sea level rise and the potential impact on our system operations as a result of looking at risk mitigation. So one of the things that Brian's team is leading is, as part of his sewer resiliency work, is looking at that question specifically, overlaying sea level rise levels on top of our existing assets, and being able to formulate plans to make certain key strategic investments to better harden our system against higher storm surges or sea level rises that could threaten our system. And board members will hear, this is a topographical map that shows you where the Buckman wastewater treatment facility is relative to storm surges, which is a sobering look. The board will hear more about this resiliency work and that study in particular in future board meetings as it gets underway. As we fast forward to after the storm, I'm going to actually deviate from the PowerPoint presentation just a little bit, and I want to draw your attention to a handout that's at your should be at your place at the table. It's one page front and back, where we've got the before, during, after on one side, and it's got restoration 1, 2, 3 on the other side. And restoration 1, 2, 3 is what I'm going to talk from just for the next couple minutes. This is how we approach restoration after a major storm event. During phase 1, we are focused entirely on public safety. And so just like when you're driving down the road, you would pull over for an ambulance, this is the time that our crews need to be 100% on focused on making sure that the public remains safe. Once we have shored up and done the restoration work that's needed for public safety, we will move into phase 2. Phase 2 is when we start focusing on individual customers, and we do restoration circuit by circuit throughout the entire electric system to make sure that our customers are restored. During phase 2, we invite our customers to call in, report their outage. That's where they'll be able to not only report their outage, but they'll be able to start getting customized information about their specific outage, when there's a crew working on their outage and when that work has been completed. Phase 3 are final repairs. This is when all of the circuits have been completely restored and we're off doing the individual repair work that's needed for the 1 or 2 customers on each of these circuits that remain out. This is when we know that being in phase 3 is incredibly frustrating for those customers that are there. And we work with them individually to make sure that nobody gets left behind or forgotten as part of our restoration process. We can do that by asking those customers to call in. We can walk them through things like checking the circuit breaker in their house, doing a visual inspection of their weatherhead, or doing other work that is very specific to that customer, and making sure that all of our customers are restored after a storm. I'm going to flip over to page 34 just to wrap up this discussion. With just some of the information that we do from an outreach perspective, we actually will be sending people out to neighborhoods during the initial assessment and restoration processes to answer questions and provide help to neighborhoods. We'll set up mobile stations at shelters so that we can provide information to people who are in those shelters about what's happening with their outage and their account. But we'll also give them things like water and kids' goodies and snacks. And our business liaisons will be focused on calling and visiting key accounts and businesses to make sure that communications are open and our recovery is as swift as it can be. So just to wrap up, we invite our community to prepare with us as we prepare for storm season. And we're going to, again, be talking to our city council members and members of the administration tomorrow to have a similar conversation about storm preparedness. Are there questions I can answer about hurricane readiness?
Ms. Green?
Excellent presentation.
Thank you. Absolutely. Mr.
Very
Cumber?
thorough.
I'm good, thank you.
Ms. Flanagan?
Thank
Reverend Newbill, any questions on the hurricane preparedness?
No, sir, I concur. Great presentation.
Great. Thank you so much. As to the building issues here, I've spoken with Mr. Zahn. We're going to do a deep dive on the real estate options. We've been talking about it for over a year. We'll get that scheduled for either a board meeting deep dive like we were holding on the shareholder framework, or perhaps a workshop, because it is a threat to our business continuity. Any other private organization wouldn't have taken this long. We need to move faster to get this resolved. So we'll get that teed up. Yep. Anything else? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dindor. Appreciate you losing sleep on our behalf. We're up to other business, old business. Is there any old business to come before the board? Is there any other new business to come before the board?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Reverend Newbill.
Yeah, I missed this in our last, but I think it would be robbery if I didn't recognize Mike Hightower with the pastor's appreciation luncheon and strategy. We had a very, very great meeting. Melissa and Aaron had a chance to go from table to table to talk with the pastors. The pastors are very, very excited. As a matter of fact, they asked for another meeting within the 1 year period. So that was a great meeting. Also, John McCarthy and Rita and his team, they met at the church on, I think it was last month, to deal with how to do business with JEA. We had a very, very good turnout. The meeting was great, and just want to, recognize John and Rita on that. And finally, Mr. Chairman, I think as it relates to the recommendation that our interim CEO made regarding the money from the land, I really think we need to hold tight to that recommendation. I know that our councilman, and I'm always thankful for him, said there are other things that the city could look at, but there is no other thing the city can look at that has a promise that was made since consolidation, and it hasn't been carried out. So I think taking the lead in that would really help our image as it relates to the city of Jacksonville. So I just want to say to Aaron that I think we need to hold fast to that as much as we can. I don't know how much leverage we have with the $18 million, but I think whatever leverage we have, it really needs to have its first priority in our septic tank issues. Thank you, Brother Chairman.
Thank you, Reverend Newbill. I appreciate your recognition of the JEA senior leadership team's outreach to our community. It's an invaluable effort to demonstrate our commitment to all of our customers in all of our communities. As for the proceeds from the sale of the Southside Generating Station, we're going to take that discussion up in detail in the July meeting. So I appreciate your thoughts on that. Thank you. Any open discussion items? Mr. Zahn?
So I'm going to just wrap this up real quick. Provided you with some notes, and I'm not going to expect you to be able to see this, the writing on that page, but we did meet with the rating agencies, and one of the things, one of the major takeaways beyond just the financial conservatism that our institution continues to bring forward is they commended us in terms of being able to manage through a difficult process over the last 6 to 8 months and emerge with a very structured transition over a 12 to 18 month. In fact, one of the senior analysts from Moody's made a comment that independent authorities that go through this conversation ultimately, oftentimes, if they take it seriously enough and reposition their business, that they emerge stronger 1 to 2 years later. And I think that was an interesting anecdote from that trip in New York that you should hear. The last is, I know and I appreciate the board's patience in this meeting. It was a very long one in which we covered a lot of topics. To that end, I'd like to ask the board's feedback in terms of a few format changes. Number one, would it be okay if from an operations and finance report that we provide our dashboard every other month and do kind of the 20-page update every other month as well? Ultimately, we would, if there were key issues that from an overall standard operations that needed to be discussed, we could bring those forward each month. What this would affect is it would allow the board to talk about the strategic and subject matter exploration issues, which are really far more forward-looking than backwards-looking. And it would also allow the senior leadership and the direct reports that support, and believe it or not, that there is a very heavy lift that goes into closing the books and producing these operation reports for the board. It would provide some relief on a monthly basis or on an every other month basis for the team to be able to focus on the business at hand, which I think you've heard in this board meeting. We've covered a lot of ground over the last 8 weeks. The second request is I think one that the chair had made for July is to contemplate moving board meetings back 1 week. What that would allow is for the financial close at the month end, which is really a cascading, is the kickoff of the board package preparation to basically the financial close to hit, and then for all the operations and other cascading reports that drive off of that, it would allow for one additional week, and I don't think it would have an impact in terms of any more that information being provided to the board, but would also perhaps allow the team greater time to review and digest it before presenting it. And then the last is more of a structural element, which is an electronic format. Believe it or not, we do spend quite a bit of money on paper. And to the extent that the board would be willing to move to electronic, that would also not only save in significant expense, but would also provide a lot in terms of flexibility. Those are three questions, and that we can maybe kind of stop and ask for some feedback on that.
Let's take them in order. On the operations reports, I think the proposal is that we would get all of the information still, but the presentation would be limited to just the dashboard and answer any questions. So you have all the financial reports that we get today every month, but the report would be abbreviated every other month to just a dashboard. Is that okay? I think we've seen today, there's a lot going on. If we are going to be the utility of the future, we'll continue to have heavy agendas. I think this will free up some valuable time. Are there any objections to changing to that format? No objections? Any objection, Revenue Bill?
No, sir.
Let's make that happen. Okay. Any conceptual issues? I don't know historically why we're scheduled when we are for our board meetings, but in order to reduce the burden on the staff in closing out the prior month, any objections to moving all board meetings back 1 week? So that would be the third week of the month. What are we now?
And we could certainly roll into we could certainly roll into this, right?
In concept, I don't have an issue. I think for the next, probably 3 to 6 months, at least for my schedule, I've scheduled around the second Tuesday.
Right.
So, I'd probably miss the next 2-3 board meetings if we did that.
Same thing.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Revenue Bill.
Next month on the 24th, we'll be heading out of the country for a while. So if we change it for next month, then hopefully I can call in, but if I can't, I won't be able to attend.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We failed to recognize our incoming members, and that's my fault. We have with us Ms. Camille Johnson and John Campion, who've been presented and are being considered by the City Council. So thank you for enduring this long meeting. They're not always this long.
No.
Sometimes they're longer. But I'll just ask if people can check their calendar, because your confirmation will be effective the 24th of July. Mayor would sign you in the 25th. I wonder if there's any availability to push the July meeting. I'm sorry, Melissa C., I'm stealing your job here. She's saying thank you, thank you. Would there be any availability on folks' calendars for sometime the following week, 30, or well, it'd be like 26, 27, or 30, 31 of July?
I could do 30.
I've got one vote for 30th.
I'm available 30th and 31st.
2 votes for the 30th. We only need 4 in person. Mr. Campion? 3? Not on the 30th. Okay. Ms. Flanagan?
It's difficult to commit to in person, but I could definitely call in.
So, and I heard you say you're leaving the country. I assume you'll still be out of the country the following week, Revenue Bill? Maybe. Reverend Newbill, did we lose you?
Yeah, no, I won't be back until August 10th.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3 on the 30th, 4 on the 30th. Others can call in.
As long as we have quorum present in the room,
4.
we need 4. So
We got
we've
4.
got the 4 that could be committed to be here.
We're going to move to the 30th. Thank you for the 4 who've committed to be here personally.
Right.
Thank you. That's if you can call in, that'd be great, Revenue Bill. If you can't, we understand.
And that's subject to approval confirmation. That doesn't get.
Oh yeah, you got to get approved.
No pressure.
No pressure.
That's right. Hide those skeletons. I'm sorry. What was your third request? We were talking about
electronic, and this
Okay.
one is really I'm trying to look out for MC.
Okay, fair enough. She's the one who puts all the books together. I will tell you that Melissa does a wonderful job. If you have Goodreader on your iPad, the links, hot links, so you get random access back and forth to the agenda and to each of the items. I love it. Thank you for doing that, Melissa. It'd be great if others did it. Anything else?
Yes. There's a preview. So I hope that this new format for the board agenda works really well in terms of looking forward. The subject matter exploration for July and August, we're looking at dark fiber and as the subject matter exploration for July. In August, we're going to talk about distributed power generation and storage. In my notes, one of the things that you will notice is, and I've brought this up at my first board meeting when I was a board member. I brought it up at every board meeting ever since in every role that I've been in. 2018, we will probably see additional annual year-over-year growth of around 100% in distributed power in terms of in our service territory, bringing our annual lost revenues and subsidies to about $5 million a year, representing a little around 0.5%. Again, and I'm going to have Russell flip to this next chart. All that is to say is if you track that for the last 5 years, we have had an average year-over-year growth rate of 105.8% in terms of growth in terms of distributed power generation. And what that is rooftop solar. That is customers procuring energy around us. We lose money in 3 ways. One is lost revenues in terms of fuel. The other is lost capacity. And then the other is in terms of net metering. The net metering has certainly been adjusted in terms of the new net metering policy. But the other two, if you walk those forward to 2025 at even a 55% growth rate, so something about half of the historical growth rate over the last 5 years, then in 2025 that'll represent around 7.7% of our revenues, relatively around $93 million a year annual. On a net present value basis over 20 years, that's about $1.2 billion. If the growth rate even exceeds up to 85%, so not even continuing at the same rate, and that's allowing for batteries, if batteries become more efficient, which we seem to be thinking that that trend will mirror that of solar, we will see revenue loss and subsidy loss of around 26% of our revenues, roughly $320 million a year or $4.3 billion over a 20-year period of time. I highlight this as just a trend that I've continued to say over and over and over in every single board meeting. In August, what I plan to do is have the team present on not only the market, not only this market, but also some of the other elements in the market in terms of how our company can be prepared to deal with this from a policy perspective, from a business model shift perspective, from a participation perspective. I don't mean this to be, we don't need to be, this is not a fire drill, so we don't need to be, having any sense of immediate urgency. What I'm hoping to do with these subject matter explorations, much like we did around the storm preparedness, July we'll talk about dark fiber and smart cities on how we might look at non-core asset values. And then in August, we can look at something that looks at really the core business, and then rolling again, probably in September, into another format. Taking those subject matter explorations, just as the chair did today, once you take something under subject matter exploration, you can the board can fully, in the community can fully appreciate the significance it has to JEA. We can then roll it into a strategic conversation, discuss it. The board can discuss it in terms of what might be the strategic alternatives that the company can take in terms of positions, and ultimately, if the board sees fit, they can move it into the operations section where we can take it, where the board can take action and give instruction to management to proceed. Again, I bring that forward in terms of my notes just to help highlight, number one, some of the trends that we're seeing, and number two, just the benefit of the new board format for the agenda and how we can use this to progress what I think are very significant issues in an open and transparent way for the media, our public, our employees, the city council, and administration to see.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any comments, questions for Mr. Zahn? Okay, my turn. I've only got 20 or 30 minutes. I mentioned at the outset of the workshop that my vision for the CEO search process included a search committee. I've confirmed with Jody that I've got the authority as board chair to appoint a committee. So we're constituting a search committee with Ms. Green, Mr. Cumber, he doesn't avoid it by sneaking out, and then one of our incoming, subject confirmation, one of our incoming board members, and myself. So a search committee of 4 persons, fourth to be determined. The other thing I want to do is compliment and thank Gina Kyle, Larry Pink's staff, Mike Hightower, their entire staff on the retirement of the SJRPP. Great job, great event, thank you. All of us who had the privilege of being there were, well, in the words of my grandson, wow, just really, really neat. So thank you for that. Also, not sure if you saw First Coast News last night, Scott Bednarz, one of our wastewater mechanical engineers, did a great job on the news last night. If you didn't see it live, you can get the link from Jerry, so thank you for that. We talked about the July board meeting. You're going to put the real estate on a deep dive schedule,
Yes.
maybe a workshop.
Yes.
We'll see where that goes. That's really all I have. I think we've outlasted the media, so good. Oh, Jim's still there. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.